Political Sciences, who is Professor Scott Hibbert, who is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Political Science at the University. And I want to just say for those of you who haven't listened to previous shows, he teaches courses on American foreign policy, Middle East politics, international relations, on religion and politics, on presidential elections. He received his PhD from Johns Hopkins and has advanced degrees from the London School of Economics and Political Science and Georgetown University. I am going to advise those of you who want to know more about Professor Hibbert to go on DePaul University's webpage. All of his texts and things are there. And because we have so much to cover tonight, I'm going to invite him in.
Okay, great to see you. Thanks for having me on again, Aminah.
And you know me and my 100 questions.
Yeah.
We have a kind of wild and flying by the ear agenda tonight, and so many things to cover. But I want to cover what's actually in the international news before we go to the more mainstream national story of the day. I turned on the TV the other day and I saw riot gear, and for a moment down ago, and it probably was, but in a different era, men running down with these policemen with these shields and stuff and tear gas, and then they tell me it's Belarus, and then I'm sitting back and I have to, where the hell is Belarus? That's the country that's next to Poland and not as far east as the Soviet Union. South of some other countries I can't pronounce. So what is going on in Belarus?
So in many respects, Belarus is the last dictatorship of the former Soviet Union. And they had elections where the president, Alexander Lukashenko, was reelected for the sixth time.
How do you get reelected for the sixth
time? Well, so they were rigged elections. And so going back to kind of my background, this is just like Hosni Mubarak running for election.
The 49
they're stage managed. The opposition gets arrested in prison, so they're not actually out campaigning. I guess there were a handful of opposition candidates that did want to put their name forward because they do have, this is the post-Soviet era, so there is a, independent civil society, but you still have the levers of government, if you will, controlled by the central state and controlled by the party, and which is Lukashenko's party, and so he did, his one of the individuals who could have garnered support was a relatively famous blogger and journalist, and he was put in prison. But his wife decided to run in his stead, and she was allowed to campaign. And she, her name was Svetlana, and I'll not get the name right, but it's Tikhanovskaya. But she captured the imagination of people on the street, and she was wildly popular.
I love it.
And the thing is, and this is kind of the interesting part of it, like, why are they even going through if it's a dictatorship, why are they going through the facade of elections? And that kind of shows you where the world is, that there is a element of democratic legitimacy that comes along with elections. So even dictatorships like those in Belarus or Egypt or Russia, they need that facade of popularity or facade of legitimacy. So they will run elections. They will control them. They'll control the media. They'll control who runs against them. But they they will run the elections. Now, what was interesting about this time is it really highlighted the fact that the government is unstable. There's a financial crisis or an economic crisis going on. They've mismanaged the pandemic. People are very much opposed to the regime, and I'm sure if they actually looked at the results of the voting, they would have realized they lost massively. But of course, since they are doing the counting, they won by 80%. So
there you go.
Yeah, but what's interesting about to kind of close this out, what's interesting about this story is the opposition candidate who was running against Lukashenko was forced to flee the country, or basically told to leave. And as I understand it, they made death threats against her children. And Yeah, yeah. And this is a brutal Stalinist style dictatorship. I mean, and so what's happened is, even though she was forced to leave, you have this large population that is adamantly opposed to the government, and now they saw through what happened, and now they're out in the streets, protesting the government, and facing off against the riot police in the streets, and it's and that's the kind of the context. But the theme of tonight's show, as we'll talk about, is you have certain kind of dynamics going on. You have an authoritarian government who's not, who's using the apparatus of the state not to provide services to the population, but to enrich themselves. And so you have basically kind of a criminal mafia at the top, and the population has really had it. And so they're in the streets. And so you're seeing those
like
trends.
here.
Yeah, what's that?
Almost like here.
Yeah. We'll talk about that later.
What is, I looked in there, the next news story was Lebanon. And some, I don't know, deposit, what was it, ammonium nitrate?
Ammonium nitrate, yeah.
Blew up. So how do you have that much ammonium nitrate near a residential area?
Yeah, so it's a tragic story on any number of levels, and Lebanon is not one of my countries I've really focused on, although I've been fascinated by its politics forever. But the first question about the ammonium nitrate is it was seized in or there was a ship that moored in the port of Beirut. It didn't have proper licensing. It was not actually seaworthy. It was clear somebody was smuggling this this cargo, which is used for high explosives. It was smuggling it from one place to another, and like a lot of ports, there's a lot of criminal elements that are engaged in the management of the port, because there's money to be made in smuggling. Right. And for one reason or another, the British or the port authority seized the cargo and stored it, because I guess the ship was getting ready to sink. And for this happened like 2013, so in the last 7 years, it's been sitting there.
Wish it had yeah.
Right, and no one's really known what to do with it, and their port authorities to keep writing to the the federal government or the national government saying, do this is real a danger. No one ever did anything with it, and and through a series, at least what's been reported on is through a series of accidents, a fire was started and it set off the ammonium nitrate. But the tragedy is it's just devastated the port and an area about 5 square miles, in the heart of Beirut, which is just shocking. And not only did I think I don't know what the number is exactly right now, like 165 or 150, 160 people are killed, 5,000 injured, but supposedly there's like 300,000 people homeless.
Yeah,
because
they all lived in those high-rise building, but it on for at least decades, touted as having this fantastic government.
Yeah.
Right. Where power shifts.
So this is kind of the tragedy of Lebanon. Even before this happened, you had a kind of it's almost a compromise, constitutional compromise that helped bring an end to the civil war in the 1990s, and that was a power sharing arrangement that allocated different parts of the government and control to different sects and different groups that had that had a stake in the civil war, had a stake in the governing of the country. And on the one hand, it was meant to be a sectarian compromise, which if you get into peace studies, there is a way in which you can create constitutional mechanisms to facilitate harmony, or at least some kind of mechanism of modus vivendi within multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies. And this was kind of an example of that. But over the last 20 years, what it's really devolved to is a handful of mafias running different parts of the economy and different parts of the government. And again, if there's a larger theme, what's happening is people who are in positions of authority and it should be providing services to the population, whether that's making sure the electricity runs or the water runs or the garbage is picked up, or they're using those positions as patronage jobs for their clan. And so they're enriching themselves at the expense of the population, and the infrastructure is crumbling, garbage doesn't get picked up, issues don't get taken care of. And this ammonium nitrate, which should have been removed 7 years ago, has been sitting languishing in some warehouse, in the port of Beirut. And so you had a economic crisis, which was only exacerbated by the pandemic. You had a fiscal crisis, which was, all very much intertwined, and you've had, this kind of stagnation. And then you have, on top of that, the explosion the other day.
What was it like when you started this network out, when you started Sound Vision those many years ago?
After 9/11, one lady called me and she says, what is your channel which I can watch? And I say, I'm sorry, we don't have a channel. And you know what she said? She said, then how America will know about you?
SubhanAllah. Anything you want to say to the people who are watching? We had one sister who messaged that she grew up on Sound Vision. What do you say to the people who have been long supporters?
Thank you. Thank you. It is because of you we are able to do all of that. So the generation of Adam's World, you need to take it over for the next generation. And that's my invitation to you. So keep telling everybody where to watch. They can watch it on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, or easy thing, muslimnetwork.tv, or our YouTube channel, or our Facebook channel. And with your help, inshallah, ladies, the one who called me, what channel should I watch Muslims on? Answer is here and now.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Hello? Something happened, and I don't know where you went, but you stopped off at troubling events, and you were talking about these little kind of mafias. So is globalization a conglomeration of little mafias?
Well, that's definitely, I mean, that's definitely part of it. There is a, what people always refer to as the dark side of globalization, that,
Mm.
you have, basically from the 1990s onward, increasing interconnectedness of states and societies on a global level, increased trade and what have you. And, insofar as it's well regulated and, things are above board, this is great. People are creating jobs and what have you. But there's also a lot of, illegal trade going on, whether it's, smuggling drugs, human trafficking, what have you, and also money laundering. And the concern has always been that that there's always going to be some degree of criminality, within any kind of body politic, and on a global level, there's always going to be some kind of international organized crime. But the question is, at what point does it become a predominant influence? And when you look at certain countries, you kind of wonder whether who's really running the show. I mean, is it the drug mafias behind the are they the ones, the real powers behind the throne? And then you look at places like North Korea, which has historically been involved in counterfeiting and illegal sale of missile parts and things like that. And there's a high degree of illegality going on with that, and a lot of this is tied up with security services. So there's a lot of 90% of the world's heroin is produced, or at least the opium for the heroin is produced in Afghanistan, and people assume that a lot of that is facilitated, or the transshipment of that is facilitated by the Pakistani intelligence services. And similarly with any kind of major militia, they frequently are involved in drug trafficking, or in Russia, human trafficking.
But everything is a vice. I mean, whether it's sex trafficking, drugs, stealing from Peter to do something with Paul, or making weapons. Everything is a vice. Nothing is for the good of the people.
Well, and this kind of gets back to kind of my larger issue that I work on, because I worked in government for many years, and I really do firmly believe that well-run governments that respect the rule of law,
where is that? Where is that?
Minnesota. I don't know. But not something. There are moments in time where we've had clean government and government that that is restrained. And this kind of gets back to the conversation that you and I were having earlier today about this notion of illiberal democracy, that we talk about democracy as this great thing, as if if you hold elections, everything's going to be fine. Because you have elections, but you have elections in Egypt, you have elections in Russia and Belarus, and they're kind of fabricated. But you also have elections where racists and fascists come to power, and it does kind of raise this question about, well, what good are elections? And the real issue is that when we talk about democracy, we talk about it as a good thing that needs to be promoted here within the United States. Well, we're really talking about liberal democratic constitutionalism. So and let me say, we're really talking about.
I have to break that up. Liberal.
Yeah. So what we're really talking about is liberal democratic constitutionalism. And the article I sent you earlier, which we could make available on the website, is written by Fareed Zakaria back in the early 1990s, and it talks about the rise of illiberal democracy, and he basically makes this argument. And and the idea is that what's really good about democratic government is restraint, laws, the rule.
You mean restraint of the government?
Yes.
In interfering in the affairs of people?
Yes.
Or restraint in exercising power over the people?
Both. And one can think about it this way, that at the end of the day, you want government to be effective, but you also want it to be accountable. Okay. So you want government to provide order, but you don't want the government to be preying upon the population.
Okay.
You want the government to, regulate, the economy, but you don't want them, muscling in on, on somebody's economic livelihood. You want, and this is really where what makes, makes government, or what makes a government effective is, is the rule of law. And this is why many of us, in the American, who've worked in government, who teach government, have just been so concerned about the Trump administration, because a lot of both the formal rules that have historically restrained government, as well as the norms, the kind of the cultural norms of what's accepted behavior, have been so frequently, kind of violated by, by the current president. And again, not to belabor this, but again, when you start looking around at these different countries, what really defines all of them is that the government, or the government, is not accountable to the governed in a meaning.
Okay.
And that's really the important point.
But when you say that Trump is violating rules, they're rules, not statutes, right? There's some kind of tacit agreement that we're going to behave in this way.
Yeah.
And if you violate it, the way with stuff, if you violate it, then you just violate, and the rest of us get to say, oh my God, he did that.
So first of all, I'd say all the above. so some of it is statutes. I mean, if you actually read the Mueller report, or the Mueller investigation, it's clear that President Trump obstructed the investigation. That is a violation of the law.
Okay.
And but because of the rules we have in this country, in the Justice Department, we cannot indict a sitting president. It's up to.
Who said that? Who made that up? Somebody sitting that was messing up?
So that's actually a standard practice within the Department of Justice. And again, so these are also they're policies. Some are laws, some are policies, some are kind of norms. So like the norms are more of like you wouldn't say certain things about certain people, or you wouldn't impugn the patriotism of a sitting president while he's overseas. Well, people did that to Barack Obama all the time, and
all the time.
And and so and this is where we talk about the coarsening of the American political discourse. That in years gone by, the opposition was the loyal opposition. Like, we may have our disagreements, but we're going to, we agree to a set of rules that we will all live by. And because we know that at some point in time we'll be in the opposition, and sometimes we'll be in power. And so we agree to abide by the same rules, because we know this, the rules will apply to us in the future in the same way they apply to, our opponent right now. And there's a certain, again, kind of cultural, a certain kind of culture of live and let live, or a culture of civility. Right. That's why I should phrase it that way. That provides kind of, in some respects, the grease by which the system operates. And what you really
go back to illiberal. What is illiberal?
So when we talk about liberal, we're basically talking about issues of liberalism, freedom and individual freedom, respect for individual rights, constitutional law. And this gets back to kind of our earlier point. You can have democracy that's very illiberal. You can have democracy
that
that's
doesn't make sense.
Well,
how can you have a democracy that's illiberal?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me unpack this for a little bit. So you can have. So the assumption is that if people are engaging in elections, that they generally buy the idea that there ought to be a rule of law, that individuals ought to have rights, and what have you. And we're not looking to get elected in order to start taking away other people's rights.
Okay.
There are political parties, for example, I'm thinking of in Serbia, back in the day of Slobodan Milosevic, when he was in power. He ran on a very populist agenda, but it was a right-wing populism. And it was all about denigrating Muslims and Catholics, Croatians and Bosnians. And it was a great way of getting the Serbian Orthodox majority behind his vote. Now, he was democratically elected, and one could argue was a Democrat. I mean, small d Democrat, but he certainly wasn't liberal. And actually, his message was very illiberal in that what he was promising was to kick out all the Muslims and to take control of the properties that they lived in, and from his perspective, he was righting a historical wrong that went back to 1389 and the wars with the Ottoman Empire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But that's an instance where you have people getting elected democratically on a very illiberal or right-wing platform. And we saw the same thing happen in Hungary earlier this year and Brazil earlier this year. And so one of the things we were going to talk a little bit about is one of the fascinating issues within Europe. And again, it's not really my area of expertise, but a lot of the kind of anti-immigrant sentiment that was generated by by the outflux of Syrians in particular, but also Iraqis and Afghanis from the different war zones all fleeing into Europe, that fed into this right-wing, kind of cultural defensiveness that helped elect a number of right-wing parties that were democratically elected, but very illiberal in their vision of how the society works.
So in Lebanon, we have people from Syria and other places running to Lebanon for safety.
Yeah.
Palestinians been running there forever, it seems. But in some ways, in such a tiny country, overburdening a system there.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't read a lot about that, but that's a really important point. Because if you think about like Syrian civil war, I mean, there's like 22 million Syrians, and I think half of them, or about 11 million, have been displaced, and 6 of them outside of the country, about 5 internally. And I think literally half of them, like 3 million, ended up in Lebanon. And I don't know what the population of Lebanon is, but
almost the population of Lebanon.
I mean, the Germans were freaking out about 100,000 refugees.
Yeah, everybody that was against Assad. Oh, I don't know what that noise is.
Yeah.
Everybody that was against the government had to flee, and they can't go home.
Yeah.
So if they went to Syria, they're stuck in Syria, where they are not Lebanese citizens, and therefore are not eligible to practice professions and this, that, and the other. Have to step 4 steps down, and God help the people who had no skills.
Yeah, and this is this is just again one of those. It's a tragedy that we watched unfold in slow motion, and it's still going on, even though it's dropped off the fronts, the front pages of the newspapers. There's still huge amounts of displacement. There's still massive refugee camps in Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon.
Right.
And for many people, their lives are just put on hold, and it's not altogether clear, where they're, what their future holds. And this is one of those, moments in time where, you really need global leadership to, stand up and say, hey, this is not just a regional problem. It's not just a Syrian problem. It's not just a Lebanese problem or Jordanian problem. This is really a world, global problem.
It is. But what do you do? I mean, we've been in a house, kinda, since March. And what would we do if our lives were put on hold with no way to think about a future?
Yeah. And, we're fortunate in that we actually have homes to be quarantined in.
I know.
Yeah. And I was at the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan a few years back, and it was just shocking because it's just so big. I mean, I would have like 100,000 people, and it's a small town,
right.
And they were no longer in tents; they were now actually in structures, but way too overcrowded. Not enough facilities. I mean, there's a program to help educate the kids, but it's tough. I mean, and talk about I mean, there's a generation coming of age in that environment. So, but again, going back to our earlier point, this is where, like in Europe and even in the U.S., you have right-wing populists who will fan the flame.
Populism is again?
Okay, yes,
Populism.
okay. So you're basically right-wing populists, people who are playing to the masses.
Okay.
And to be clear, I try to differentiate between right-wing populism and left-wing populism.
Okay.
Left-wing populism is typically class-based. So if you're running if you're running a campaign, and I'll use Bernie Sanders as an example, he's basically making a class-based argument that the Wall Street types are plundering the wealth of this country, and the working man is getting the shaft. And it's actually a fairly accurate argument. But the point is that he's trying to appeal to a populist base.
Okay.
He's making a left-wing argument based on class, and class divisions within society, as opposed to race or ethnicity or religion.
Okay.
And when you look at like Modi in India, he's a right-wing populist in that he's trying to appeal to his base, but he's not making a class-based argument. He's making an ethnic, religious, kind of nationalist argument about who's a good Hindu or who's a good Indian, upper class or Hindu, and who's not a good Indian. And so you have this kind of you're either trying to break up the society, or trying to mobilize people along class lines, or you're trying to mobilize people along race, religion, or ethnicity. And kind of going back to this country, what's so fascinating about this moment in time is Trump is basically a right-wing populist, very much on the along the lines of Modi or somebody like that, where he's demonizing an other, whether that's African Americans or Hispanics or Mexicans or immigrants or Syrians or Muslims, and he's always identifying some kind of other as a way of mobilizing or activating his base, which he sees as kind of the white working class. And that worked well for him in the last election. What's interesting about this moment in time is the Republican Party as a larger group of people. Many of them are horrified at what's going on. Many of them are leaving the party, but many of them also realize that this is a very, very short-term strategy, because you can invoke that white supremacy and that might get you a certain amount of votes, but at the end of the day, there's a big pool of people out here, and the country is really rapidly changing. And you may win another election or two, but in the long run, just the numbers aren't in your favor.
Okay, and we're going to take a break here for about a minute and come back and deal with our favorite country, Britain, and our other favorite country called the United States. Be back in a moment.
your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
You know, way back when we fought a war to dump Britain, or to at least dump Britain's hold over us.
Yes.
And in the centuries since then, we have in many ways solidified our association. I'll call it an association. When Britain went, well, not Britain, but when all of Europe went into something called the European Union, people like me worried, well, are my francs going to be worth anything anymore? And my lira, because I collect coins from everywhere to use to get a paper or this, that, and the other and read anyway. But now with Britain leaving, and I guess it took somebody with her and they left somebody behind, and the European Union seemingly in all kinds of chaos with an economic recession. I don't believe it's just Britain, an economic recession. What's going on? Because what does that say for all of these other connections they've made and holdings they have in the Muslim world?
Yeah. So again, this is not really necessarily my turf, but I've
It's
spent
not mine either, but let's
a
go.
lot of time in Europe, and it's funny. I was working. I did a graduate degree in London many years ago, and I spent some time working as a research assistant to a member of parliament right at the time when they were debating the EU, and it was a really fascinating, kind of moment in time, because what was happening was the Europe coming out of World War II recognized that there was a lot of problems with being individual states trying to compete in a larger international, environment with bigger states. So you have Russia, the U.S., China. Well, China was still, somewhat underdeveloped back then. But, how does a England shorn of its colonies compete? How does a Germany, shorn? Well, it lost its colonies many years ago. But how does a France shorn of its colonies, without its colonies, compete? In a global environment, particularly coming out of World War II, where your economies are completely devastated. Right. And so what happened was there was a, kind of going back to our liberalism narrative, there was a liberal notion that the best way that, that we can all develop together is by, binding our societies and economies together. And that began with the formation of the Trade and Coal Union, where, that kind of rebuilt all these society, or rebuilt these core, economic activities in France and Germany in particular, but bound them together so that economies were already very much intertwined, just coming right out of World War II. And that continued to develop, and it went from like the Coal and Trade Union to the European Common Market to the European EEC, European Economic Community. And it finally got to a point where they formed a political structure to go along with the economic structure.
Okay.
And so, and quite frankly, it comes back to this idea that they're stronger together than they are separately. I mean, if each individual had to compete with Russia, they'd be toast. But if they, if they have a combined economy and a combined policy and a shared vision, they're going to be that much more, powerful in operating in the international community. And that vision really held true all the way through through the end of the Cold War. And then it really kind of took it to the next level in the post-Cold War period, in the era of globalization, and the EU was a major player. Now, one of the challenges, and this goes back to your comment about enjoying the franc and the lira and the pound, is that once they unified politically, there was always this question about, and they have a common market and in a highly integrated economic structure, do they also have a common currency? And at some time they did go on the euro, and that seemed like a great idea, but it wasn't, because if you're going to have if you're going to have a common currency, you need to have a common monetary policy. In order to have a common, economic policy / monetary policy, you really need to have a common fiscal policy, which means, how much governments spend and, tax and spend. Well, each individual state does not want to give up control over its budget, but they want the benefits of the shared currency and the shared economic order. And so in some respects, the problem with the EU is it was only like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It wasn't a complete union. They didn't go that extra step. When the 2008 financial collapse happened, that translated into a sovereign debt crisis, which is more detailed than we want to get into. But the point is that it was at that moment that you had this economic crisis, and you had very different visions about how to deal with it. Coming from Germany, which had all the banks, had one vision. People in Greece, which had a lot of the debt, had a different vision.
Yeah, of course.
I was in Greece, I think in 2013, when there were protests in the street, and what they were protesting was not so much the government, but they were protesting the German bankers.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of some of the underlying issues, but there's still, in my opinion, at the end of the day, Europe is still the underlying dynamics haven't changed. You're still going to be stronger together than you are separate. And this is why Brexit makes no sense in my mind. It just makes no sense. I mean, I understand the politics of it, and I understand why it happened. And the way I look at it is, some people like Boris Johnson, was kind of pandering to this right-wing base,
right?
Saying, but the other was not necessarily an indigenous other. It was the French and the Germans and the Europeans telling us what to do.
Yeah.
And and there's there are a lot of people who lived in Northern England and who actually should have, who are total labor, they're labor supporters, but they they voted for Boris Johnson, and they voted for Brexit.
It sounds much like an English version of some understandings, mine being totally naive, of federalism. We have states which don't want to most of the time, because they want to enjoy the benefits of cohering, because then they can get federal this, that, and the other. But then it's like, well, my only state, no, in my state, we're not going to wear any masks. Well, in my state, we will. So what happens to things like the law of commerce, which enables us to move between states? Problem is, I did pay attention during this part in the course, to move between states. If states now are back to having separate policies that they can enforce, put you in jail over.
Yeah. So that is the crux of the matter, which you just got at. This idea of federalism, that, and quite frankly, these are human issues. I mean, it's a challenge in our society, it's a challenge in European society. Who actually, has control? Is it, are you going to delegate authority or decision-making power to, Washington, or do you want it, here in Springfield, or whatever? And and invariably, people prefer to have greater control. People want to have control of their own lives.
Right.
So at least in this society, historically, what we've done is we've kind of differentiated different, tasks, if you will, and certain areas of responsibility. And so coordinating economic policy is really done at the federal level, and coordinating defense policy and foreign affairs is really done at the national level. Whereas, states are kind of manage their, regulate their insurance industry and regulate X, Y, and Z, and they have differing policies regarding environmental standards. Although there's also federal environmental standards, but there are certain things that that localities do. Chicago has certain policies on parking and X, Y, and Z, and so what happens at the local level really is kind of local, and there's under local control, and stuff that really that affects the larger community or the national community is really regulated at at the national level. Now, what's been interesting in the last 20 years, or at least since the 1990s, is you now have this international dynamic, international banks, international trade, international commerce of various sorts. But you don't have a robust regulatory structure for that. I mean, you've got the World Trade Organization, which is kind of set up in some respects to provide the rules of the road, it's meant to mediate disputes, but there's no real regulatory structure for banking. And so it's really still up to individual states to regulate their own banks. And what's happened is you have all this offshore banking in the Canary Islands or whatever, Panama, and now you've got illegal activity going on, money laundering, whatever, tax evasion. And there's no regulatory structure to kind of deal with that. And this is where I'm kind of tying the two conversations together. But this is one of the reasons why people did vote for Brexit in the UK. And actually, I have a friend who voted for Brexit. I was kind of surprised to find that out. But but from his perspective, the globalization has not served his community well. They've seen a lot of loss of jobs, a lot of manufacturing jobs have gone overseas.
Right.
Same way they have up in Michigan and Illinois and Wisconsin and Ohio, and people know what there once was. If you ever go to Lancaster, it used to be a very, very in northern England. There's very vibrant manufacturing base, and it's not there anymore.
Well,
and so
because people have either lacked in transference of skills, right, or brought those skills up to snuff.
Yeah, or you can also look at another side of it, that a lot of both federal policy in England as well as in the UK is really catered to the financial sectors at the expense of the manufacturing sectors. So a lot of government policy is really designed to help Wall Street.
Right.
And much
everywhere. Yeah. No matter what you call the street.
Yeah.
But I want to stop this conversation because I want to go to our wonderful election. And I'm trying to discuss an illiberal democracy. Is this populism left versus center versus right, or if I don't know.
Okay.
Many of our listeners don't know Kamala Harris is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I totally know. I see where you're going with this. So this is actually, again, why. I find all of this stuff fascinating. Whether it's whether it's EU or Brexit, or I'm a political junkie. This is what I get paid to do. I love this stuff. But the American this coming election, people always talk about this election is most important in American history, and I kind of hate to say that, but this one really is. But it's fascinating because it's you're really getting a stark choice.
Yeah.
That's in many respects, Donald Trump is a classic illiberal Democrat, small d Democrat. I mean, he wants to be Alexander Lukashenko, right?
Yeah,
he would love to send in the troops, and I think that
he did.
And we talk about these as mafia runs countries, whether it's Tunisia under Ben Ali or Mubarak, Mubarak era, or Lukashenko or Russia. But in some respects, Trump really does have this background, in New York, and if all the reporting is correct, he's had ties with both the Italian mafia and the Russian mafia, and I think that's kind of his mentality, is that it's politics is smash mouth. It's it's the will of the stronger, and there's this and you do whatever it takes to win, and you don't play by the rules consciously, and I have a feeling that, but then you look at the other side of the coin, and there's Biden and the Biden Harris ticket, and they really are kind of a throwback to kind of, I don't want to kind of Obama Biden era, but they're a throwback to an earlier era where it's like, no, there are rules of the game, and we need not just to protect the rules, we need to protect the institutions, because this game is
But what's
large.
going to happen? How can you even do that when he has made it his claim to fame to demolish so many, not only the institutions, but the roads to the institutions?
Yeah. So this is where this is the issue. This is the problem.
Yeah.
My fear is this is going to be an ugly election. It's going to be an ugly election. There'll be efforts. Yeah, it's already started off ugly. There will be lies. There will be slander. There will be efforts to suppress the vote. It's already started. President Trump was describing Biden as a godless man who's going to destroy the.
How would he know? He holds the Bible upside down.
I know.
How would he know?
So this is just kind of a foreshadowing of what's going to come, and particularly because Trump is doing so poorly in the polls, that as we get closer to the election, and the stakes get higher, and I think he's going to become more desperate,
right.
and I really kind of fear for what's going to happen, particularly as the current story, or one of the stories that's been covered in the recent news cycles, is the effort to suppress the postal service. Donald Trump put in charge an
idiot.
Well, basically, if a campaign contributor with no background in anything related to postal delivery, but the whole point is he's
moving quickly,
dismantle the postal service and consciously slow down the postal delivery. And one could only assume that this, the argument's made, well, we're trying to make it more efficient. But I'm looking at this, and I've been in politics. I know dirty tricks when I see them.
Right.
This is another way of suppressing the vote, and so it's going to be an ugly campaign. But again, to me, it's there really is like two different choices. Are we going to go back to a rules-based order where we respect the institutions, we strengthen the institutions, government is accountable to the population, we all not just abide by the rule of law, but we embrace the rule of law, or we go back to this kind of mafioso mentality of government is just the will of the stronger, and the point of getting power is to enrich ourselves and enrich our friends and enrich our benefactors.
So with I was laughing at here it is 2020, we got two septuagenarians running to be president, either one who might croak any minute. But nevertheless, what about Biden and Kamala Harris? People saw her in the primaries as this fiery, taking up space and air over issues that didn't matter. What? Tell me how that works today.
Well, so I think there's kind of two different sets of issues. One is kind of personal, and one's policy.
Okay.
If you look at the personal issue, I kind of see this to Biden's credit that he took a former critic and brought her into the fold.
Yeah.
I guess there's a third dimension too. There's just politics. I hate to say it, this is what happens in primary season. If you're out there on the stage with 9 people, I mean, how do you get attention?
Okay.
So you got to be you got to be outspoken, and Senator Harris certainly was. But then there's the policy side, and I think that on the one hand, Biden has obviously forgiven her, but I think the other side of it is the policy side, that they're actually fairly close, from a policy perspective, and I think that she's probably a better fit with his policies than somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. So there's a certain commonality, and I think also you look at her. I mean, she's sharp. I mean, she is a debater.
That's true.
She's.
That's
I
true.
mean, I mean, I find her very charismatic. I think she's a great campaigner. She's going to not only be able to kind of help him get elected, but I think she'll be a real asset when she comes into the job, and she will be very much of a full partner in a way that Biden was a full partner with Obama, and that stuff's that's important. I mean, that's really important. And I was talking to a neighbor of mine the other day, and because we were talking about this, and he's a journalist here in Chicago, and he was just kind of saying, God, I'm just so tired of amateur hour. Just pick somebody who can govern, who's done something.
Right. Who can do something.
I think that will resonate with the American population.
Well, I think what we'll do, since you're our resident political scientist, is from here until November, devote a little bit of your time to analyzing what we see, and however it is they have debates, how we can try to help the public, our listening audience at least, figure out what is happening here, what did happen there, without waiting for the pundits who are on TV to tell us what happened. Because usually, that's what they're doing, is teaching us one way or the other. It's like, I didn't see what I just saw, kind of thing. So we will do that. And our hour, our 55 minutes or 50 minutes is up.
Okay.
And as usual, so much to cover. And I will see you next time in a few weeks to pick your mind and brain some more. And all those things that you keep talking about are not in your wheelhouse. Put them in your wheelhouse, because they're not on mine either. And Critical Talk is a program from Muslim Network TV, which is a program from Sound Vision. And I hope that you tomorrow evening, and of course always with Professor Scott Hibbert. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.